Today's video we're going to be studying Introduction to Biochemistry, and here we have the outline of what we'll be discussing: definition, overlaps, biomolecules, polymerization, bonds, biopolymers and cells. Okay, so let's start off with the definition. Now, biochemistry is the study of chemical processes that go on in living things. Okay, now living things, even as little as unicellular organisms, carry out very complex chemical reaction, and biochemistry focuses on those chemical reactions that take place in living things. Now we can see that the term is made of two words: bio and chemistry. Okay, so it makes sense that it's the study of chemical processes that takes place in living things or living organisms in general. Okay, so let's take a look at the overlapping areas in biochemistry. Biochemistry overlaps with a lot of different branches of science like molecular biology, cell biology, and molecular genetics. Okay, and a good understanding of physiology and biochemistry is essential in pharmacology because the metabolism of drugs goes on in enzyme catalyzed reaction, and all of these things are the chemical processes that take place in living things. Also, we have an interesting area of toxicology which deals with the study of poisons and toxins, and poisons have a way of affecting normal chemical processes. Now, it's also important for us to take note of the fact that biochemistry actually studies the normal chemical processes. Okay, normal is highlighted here because a different branch of science known as chemical pathology studies abnormal chemical processes that take place in living things. So, chemical pathology, a term coined from chemical and pathology. So while biochemistry studies normal chemical processes in living things, chemical pathology studies these chemical processes as they are affected by pathogens in situations of diseases. Okay, so these are some overlapping areas in biochemistry. So let's take a look at biomolecules. Now, as earlier stated, biochemistry is the study of the chemical processes that takes place in living things. And these chemical processes or chemical reactions have reactants and products. Okay. Now, in living things or in living organisms, these reactants and products are majorly biomolecules. Okay, biomolecules are also sometimes referred to as biopolymers. Okay, and it's important for us to take note of the fact that most of the biomolecules, or in fact all of the biomolecules and biopolymers, are actually organic compounds. And in my video on Introduction to Organic Chemistry, I mentioned the idea of vitalism. Okay, now vitalism was the idea or the concept of the fact that organic compounds could only be synthesized in living things. So it was the idea that living things have a vital force, and this vital force is what enables them to be able to produce and synthesize these organic compounds. But this idea and this context, or rather this concept, has been debunked because a lot of organic compounds can now be synthesized inorganically, okay, in the laboratory, and even through some geological processes organic compounds are being able to be synthesized. Okay, so the major biomolecules in living things are carbohydrates. Okay, carbohydrates, and then we have proteins, we have lipids, and then we have nucleic acid. nucleic acids. Now, all of these four biomolecules, which are also referred to as biopolymers, are made up of smaller subunits. Okay, so they are made up of smaller molecules that link up together and bond together to form these giant macromolecules that would go on to form supramacro structures and supramacro molecules. So let's take a look at polymerization. Polymerization is the process by which polymers are formed by the bonding of smaller subunits, which are called monomers. Now, as we have seen earlier, most of the biomolecules are polymers, okay, and they are formed by polymerization. Now, there are different forms and types of polymerization, but for most biomolecules, the form of polymerization they undergo is condensation polymerization. Okay, condensation polymerization. Now, this form of polymerization is also known as dehydration synthesis. In condensation polymerization, water molecule is formed as part of the product. So what simply happens is that from the word dehydration, we can tell that water is being removed. So we have hydrogen being eliminated from one of the monomers on one hand, and the OH group being removed from the other monomer on the other hand. And so we have water molecule forming as a product, and the two molecules link together and form these polymers. Now, a good example would be to take a look at carbohydrates. So in taking a look at carbohydrates, we have monomers like glucose. Okay, glucose is a monomer, it's a monosaccharide. Okay, and just to link this with our idea of organic chemistry, glucose has the formula C6H12O6. Okay, and a fancy chemical term for glucose is actually a polyhydroxyl aldose. Okay, glucose is a polyhydroxyl aldose. Now, although this term seems complicated and complex, it simply means that glucose contains multiple OH groups, and the carbonyl group in glucose is actually located at the end of the chain or at the terminal carbon. So there's nothing really complex about it. We have these glucose molecules combining together to form polymer. Okay, so we have the monomer here, and then we have a polymer like cellulose. Okay, and then we have this polymer or this macromolecule going on to form supramolecular structures like the cell wall of plants. Okay, and taking a look at proteins, so first in proteins we have the monomers like amino acids. Okay, so we have amino acids. These amino acids would link together to form protein subunits. Okay, so protein subunits, and these protein subunits would go on to form enzymes and other protein structures that we have in the body. We have protein complexes. Okay, and then looking at lipids, which is a fancy word for fat and oil. Okay, so lipids, we have monomers like fatty acids. Okay, fatty acids. These fatty acids would link together to form something like a phospholipid. And this phospholipid forms an essential part of the cell membrane, which is the phospholipid bilayer of the cell membrane. And looking at nucleic acids, so we have nucleic acids. The monomers we have here, we have nucleotides. These nucleotides would go on to form DNA, and the DNA would form part of a supramolecular structure, which is the chromosome. Okay, so these are the biomolecules and polymerization and how it all takes place. Okay, now let's take a look at bonds. There are a lot of important bonds in biochemistry, and bonds that we have already learned from general chemistry, like the covalent bond, hydrogen bonding for intramolecular forces, the van der Waals forces, and so on. Okay, and even the organic, or rather even the ionic bond is also present here in biochemistry. So we have all of these bonds playing out. Okay, so we have covalent bonds and even ionic bonds. Now, of course, we know that covalent bond is an intramolecular bond. So it's the bond that exists within the atoms that make up these molecules. Okay, then we have intermolecular bonds or intermolecular forces, which are the bonds or the forces that are between. Okay, so intra is within and inter is between. So it's between different molecules, okay, that link them up together so they can form liquids or solids or gases, as the case may be. Some of these forces or some of these bonds are weak, and a very important bond that is seen in in biochemistry is the hydrogen bond. The hydrogen bond is actually what helps to keep the nitrogen bases in the DNA in place. So it's a very important bond. It's also a bond that exists between water molecules, and it gives water its very fascinating behavior and structure, as we would go on to look at in further videos in biochemistry. Also, it's also good for us to take note of the bonds that exist between monomers when they link together to form polymers. So the bonds that exist between the monomers in carbohydrates. Okay, so for carbohydrates we have these monomers linking together by glycosidic bonds. Okay. Then in proteins we have peptide bonds, and in nucleic acids we have phosphodiester bonds. Now let's take a look at biopolymers and cells. Now, in studying biopolymers and cells, what we consider is where these biopolymers can be found in the cell, the roles that they play and how they come about in the cell. So we have nucleic acid, which is an important biopolymer forming the DNA, okay, essential part of the DNA. Then we have enzymes, most of which are proteins that can be denatured by heat. Okay, so we have enzymes, and then we have bilayers, as we have seen, like the phospholipid bilayer of the cell membrane, which is a lipid, and of course we have the cellulose, which is carbohydrate. Just as an aside, we have here cellulose. Now, cellulose is one carbohydrate that the human body cannot break down. Okay, so the human body lacks enzymes that are able to break down cellulose into assimilable particles. Now, this is because cellulose has certain glycosidic bonds that cannot be broken down by the enzymes in the human body. So different polymers of carbohydrates have different forms of glycosidic bonds, and the particular glycosidic bond in cellulose cannot be broken down by the enzymes in the human body, and we would go on to see this in our videos and in the further videos in this playlist. Okay, now in terms of synthesis and where these biopolymers come from, some cells are able to synthesize these biopolymers, so they are able to make use of the constituent atoms, the constituent elements. They combine them together in order to form these biopolymers. Other cells are able to convert from one polymer to another, and even still other cells are able to obtain them. Other organisms and cells are able to obtain these biopolymers from an external source or from the external environment. So for this video, which is a brief introduction into biochemistry, this is all we'll be studying. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for watching till the end.